When I was 16, I discovered two harsh realities within my family. Silence was a means to survive, and I was terrible at keeping quiet. I did not yell or act out. Instead, I asked questions like, why did Aunt Marlene stop visiting? Why were there two sets of financial records in Dad's office after the will was read? And why did Mom always say, we do not discuss that whenever someone brought up the fire on Sycamore Street? To our neighbors, they described me as having an artistic spirit, but at home, they began labeling me unstable. They moved my bedroom to the basement and banned me from sitting at the dinner table when guests were over. Mom claimed it was because I made people uneasy. Invitations to family trips stopped coming, with the excuse being, it is not the right time. We are keeping things low-key. You need to rest. They constricted my world while blaming me for how I reacted to all of it. When I confided just once in my English teacher, only enough to hint that something was wrong at home, she called my parents out of worry. That night I returned to an empty room. No bed, no desk, only a suitcase by the door. Mom handed me a folded note and said, "You are going to Lakeview Wellness. You will get the help you need." I stared at her in disbelief and asked, "What help?" She smiled and replied, "The kind that makes you quiet." It dawned on me then that I wasn't being sent away. I was being erased. The file arrived just after lunch. A new inpatient diagnosed with severe anxiety, episodes of dissociation, night terrors, and violent outbursts triggered by traumatic memories. Age 25. The name, Tyler Monroe. I stared at the page, waiting for my heartbeat to calm down. I recognized that name instantly. I had grown up hearing it countless times whenever someone said, "Why can't you be more like your brother?" My hand remained steady, and my voice did not betray any doubt when I spoke to the attending doctor. I told her I would take the case. She asked if I was certain. I replied yes, though that was not true. The last time I saw Tyler Monroe, he was 13 years old. He stood at the top of the stairs while I was being led out the front door by two strangers wearing white coats. He never asked where I was going, nor said a word. He simply watched. Now, years later, I was the one receiving his intake papers. Tyler's medical records were sparse, too sparse, almost as if someone had wiped the history clean. He had been admitted just 2 days prior after smashing a mirror in his apartment. He claimed to have no memory of the incident, yet neighbors reported hearing screams. They said he kept repeating a name, but it was indistinct. I had a strong suspicion of whose name that was. That afternoon, I entered the observation room. The setup was typical. One-way glass, neutral lighting, but I recognized him before he saw me. The face was the same, only aged and fragile now, skin stretched tightly over his jaw, eyes flickering without focus. He looked like a person waiting for a ghost. For the first time in 13 years, I considered that maybe I was not alone in being haunted. Sleepless that night, I tried to tell myself it was just the call schedule, the charts, the usual residency stress. But the truth was far simpler. I was not prepared to face my past. Seeing a mother's eyes reflected on a younger face was unsettling. I wasn't ready to face my brother and act as if this was just a routine case. This situation was not justice. It was more like a reflection. I wasn't sure which one of us would break first. The following morning I drafted the transfer request, typing out the words, "Every resident reaches a breaking point when the burden becomes too heavy." It was a mix of personal history and internal conflict, a cry for reassignment. Yet, I never submitted it. Instead, I sat across from Dr. Patel during morning coffee rounds. She had supervised me in emergency psychiatry for 2 rotations and understood what silent stress looked like. She glanced at me and then at the blank form in my hand. "You can walk away, Elise, but ask yourself, are you protecting him or guarding the idealized version of yourself they expected you to be?" I had no response because deep down, I wondered if this was less about healing Tyler and more about making them see me as a professional, not as a patient or a problem to be dismissed. That was not justice. That was pride. And pride has no place in treatment. But what did matter was accountability. By the end of the day, I reopened Tyler Monroe's case, cleared my schedule for the next 72 hours, and returned to the clinic with one thing in mind. I was not seeking revenge. I was hunting for the truth. And perhaps that was the more dangerous path. The house was still standing, barely. It had not been sold, simply left to decay, its windows boarded up. A faded mailbox and a patch of lifeless grass marked the spot where the rose bushes once flourished. I parked across the street and waited, uncertain of what I sought, perhaps closure or proof that it had not been a mere fantasy. The front door stood open, as expected. Inside, the wallpaper hung loose, mold filled the corners, and the kitchen held a thick layer of dust and remnants of old gas pipes. Yet the staircase appeared untouched. The third step from the top still gave a creak, and the hallway retained a faint scent of lemon polish and control. I went to my former room, now stripped bare, but I recalled the floorboard by the window, the one that shifted under a precise step. I lifted it, expecting emptiness, but found a small tin box inside. It contained a folded photograph, a note written in fading ink, and a child's drawing, all mine. The photo showed me at 16, arms crossed beside Mrs. Rivera, our old neighbor, the woman who used to bring me books, and once said, "You don't imagine the truth, you see it before others do." The note was hers. It said, "I saw what they did. You weren't sick. They were scared of you one day. You'll come back. And when you do, don't knock. Take your place." I sat on the floor, the letter resting in my lap, and realized she had believed in me. Someone had believed in me. Suddenly, I wasn't there to remember what I had lost. I was there to reclaim who I had always been. The next morning, I entered the hospital carrying the letter in my coat pocket. It was strange how a single piece of paper could bear so much weight. As small as a folded sheet of paper could somehow influence your height. Tyler was set for his initial real appointment. I requested the nurse to escort him into the consultation room. With a notebook ready, I inhaled the sterile air, trying to stay composed. When the door opened, he appeared older than my last memory of him, though not by much. There was a certain rawness about him, a kind of unfinished sorrow that only shows in those raised to believe that pain should be hidden. At first, he did not recognize me, but when I identified myself as Dr. Monroe, a flicker of bewilderment crossed his eyes. His jaw tightened just as it had when he was a child trying not to shed tears. He settled down, his gaze darting everywhere except at me. I went through the usual questions carefully. Sleep, appetite, memory, nightmares. Each response was brief, guarded, as if he feared revealing too much. Midway through the conversation, he finally met my eyes and asked, "Have we met before?" I hesitated, the old urge to deceive rising inside me, yet I suppressed it and said, "We grew up in the same town." He nodded, but his hands kept fidgeting anxiously, as though searching for an escape in the darkness. The session ended with more silence than speech, but I sensed a subtle change. For the first time, I did not just see my brother. I recognized the wounds our family had left on both of us. And for the first time in years, I was the one holding the pen. I began exploring not Tyler directly, but the area surrounding him. His medical records were far scarcer than expected, only 2 hospital stays recorded and neither documented properly. The notes were vague, mentioning only stress-related issues. I was assigned to monitor the episode characterized by delusions. There were no clear diagnoses, no long-term treatment plans, just a sequence of dismissals and silence. I submitted a formal request for his previous therapy records, but it met with resistance. Then, 2 days later, a sealed manila envelope appeared on my desk. Inside were 5 compact discs labeled in fading ink. Tyler Monroe Sessions 1 to 5. I stayed late that evening and played the first recording. The audio was rough. The voice on the tape sounded barely like a teenager, restless and defensive. Tyler recounted an incident, saying, "What if I saw something I wasn't supposed to?" The therapist asked, "Like what?" Tyler hesitated, then whispered, "She did not scream. She just looked at Mom, and then they took her." My chest tightened, and I skipped ahead to the next tape. Tyler said they told him she had to leave because she was dangerous, but he disagreed. He believed she simply knew too much. By the 3rd session, his voice broke in places. He spoke of nightmares with doors slamming and a woman's voice saying, "Make her disappear." He never used my name, but it was unnecessary. I sat alone in that dim office, listening to a child who had buried a truth because the adults around him made lies feel safer. Tyler had been shielding the family narrative the same way I had once tried to reshape mine into something survivable. Now, years later, both versions were falling apart on tape. For the first time, I possessed more than just memories. I had proof. The family session was scheduled for Thursday. It was not compulsory, but the clinic strongly advised attending. Cynthia had already RSVP'd within the... Around that same time, Robert did as well, which did not catch me off guard. They preferred performances they could control, especially those where they could portray themselves as victims of circumstances. I cleared my entire schedule that day not only for Tyler Monroe, but also for myself. I knew what I intended to say, but I was uncertain about what I needed to hear. The previous night I stood before the bathroom mirror longer than usual. Hair tied back, no jewelry, minimal makeup, no theatrics, just presence and focus. I wore navy blue, avoiding black, neither mourning nor reminiscing, something crisp and quietly formal, like a verdict waiting to be delivered. Before leaving my apartment, I slipped Mrs. Rivera's letter into my bag. Not because it was necessary, but because I owed her the honor of being with me. She recognized me when no one else could, and wrote truths I was too young to speak. At the hospital, I carefully reviewed Tyler Monroe's updated treatment plan. In my mind, I practiced how to start the session, how to guide it back if it veered off track, and what to do if someone broke down, yelled, or refused to engage. I reminded myself this was not about vengeance, but about clarity. Tyler needed the reality even if it came from the very person his family had tried to erase. Perhaps in a quiet way, I needed it too. Not for healing, nor for peace, but to be fully acknowledged professionally and without excuse. I had earned this moment, not through anger, but through return. They arrived late. Cynthia in a beige coat, Robert in navy. Neutral, respectable, intentional. The exact shades people choose when they want to appear blameless. Tyler was already sitting when they came in, shoulders tense, fingers nervously tapping the edge of his sleeve. I rose to welcome them. They offered polite nods without any spark of recognition, just the distant demeanor of parents accustomed to being respected. I asked if they wanted some water, but they refused. I inquired whether they were ready to start. Cynthia smiled and said, "Certainly, we want only the best for our son." I sat opposite them, opened the file, and proceeded as I would in any case. Tyler is reacting to environmental signals, triggers connected to memories, especially repressed trauma. His symptoms align with dissociative episodes stemming from events in early adolescence. Cynthia tilted her head as if she watched closely, like witnessing a sibling institutionalized simply for the sake of the household's convenience, without reason or diagnosis, just abandonment. A silence fell. Then a flicker crossed Cynthia's face. Her expression remained unchanged, but her eyes sharpened. "Robert." He shifted uneasily in his seat. "Excuse me," he said. Are you implying our son's condition is our fault? I closed the file and responded, I'm saying trauma is not confined to battlefields. It occurs in dining rooms, in living rooms, in homes that teach silence more than safety. Tyler's hands stilled. He whispered, You were the one, the girl from the stairs. I met his eyes and said clearly, My name is Dr. Elise Monroe. Cynthia's face showed no emotion, but her knuckles gripped the armrest until white. I knew you looked familiar, she said softly, like a snake. Robert's lips parted, but no sound emerged. Tyler blinked rapidly, as if his mind struggled. He was piecing together his memories, saying, I saw them take you. I heard Mom say you were considered dangerous. Cynthia interrupted with, That was many years ago. She was not well, and we did what we had to do. I kept my tone even and responded, No, what you did was confuse truth with instability. You changed questions into symptoms, and then you buried me. Robert stood up, declaring, We're leaving, but Tyler stayed put. I remember everything clearly now, he said. You never screamed. You only looked back quietly. Cynthia also stood, her voice lowering. She was a troubled child. I stood last, saying, No, I was merely a mirror, and you didn't like the reflection. They left without another word. The door clicked shut, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Tyler leaned forward and remarked, You really became a doctor. I nodded. He exhaled painfully and said, I think they are scared of you now. I neither smiled nor boasted, only calmly collected my notes and replied. The following day after the session, I submitted a transfer request for Tyler. It was not personal, but a matter of protocol. Treating someone so deeply connected to your own history is not only unethical, but also dangerous, not to them, but to you. The clinic director approved the transfer in less than an hour, without questions, only a respectful nod and a quiet acknowledgement that I did what many would not. I completely disengaged from the case, sending an internal report with transcripts from the tapes, notes from Tyler's sessions, and an additional file titled Family Influence Suppression of Symptoms. I did not exaggerate or accuse. I merely documented the reality, what truly was. For many years, the truth was concealed behind polite smiles and fractured family facades. That afternoon, I accessed the archived patient database. My name was absent. No file, no notes, no admission record. By law, I had never been institutionalized. Yet I recalled the walls, how they vibrated softly at night, the burden of the locked door, and the silence that trailed me afterward. After requesting a search via insurance billing, I discovered a hidden file under a false identity, signed by a doctor I did not recognize. The diagnosis read acute adolescent psychosis, behaviorally disruptive. I was 15. There was no therapy or medication, just silent observation. I printed the document and held it carefully, thin sheets carrying a heavy truth. It was not justice, not yet, but it served as evidence. For a long time, I believed my story was too quiet to be important, yet silence leaves marks if you know where to search. The story was never intended to spread, but someone on the clinic board leaked the memo. Perhaps it was the wording, the tape transcripts, or the fact that I signed my full name for the first time in years without hesitation. 2 weeks later, a modest wellness blog shared it, followed by a mental health rights forum. Then a journalist requested a quote. I refused. The story no longer required my voice. The truth stood clearly in public view. Cynthia sent a cease and desist letter, accusing me of defamation, emotional harm, and an ongoing campaign of public harassment. I sent the humiliation to legal and returned to my work. I did not need to defend myself because I possessed the file, the billing records, and the recordings. Tyler Monroe sent a brief email with just one sentence saying they were pretending nothing had happened. I answered with only 2 words. Naturally, the hospital conducted a formal investigation into the Monroe case history. The original psychiatrist who had made the diagnosis gave up his license. An ethics committee was quietly formed behind closed doors, but the matter was not forgotten. One evening, Dr. Patel approached me in the corridor and said, "Do you realize how unusual it is for someone to come back and reveal the truth from within?" I replied, "I did not return to reveal anything. I returned to understand it." The revelation was merely a side effect that night. I walked home alone without music or distractions, only the sound of my footsteps, steady and assured. For the first time, the world was calling my name, and I did not hesitate. The invitation arrived in a cream-colored envelope with thick paper and an embossed seal. It was an invitation to a national symposium on adolescent psychiatric ethics, entitled Misdiagnosis Power and the Cost of Silence. They asked me to speak. I almost declined, saying I was not a speaker and did not want applause. Then I thought about how many voices never get that chance, and how many girls were still being told they were too emotional, too dramatic, too much. So I accepted. The auditorium was small and intimate, filled with attentive faces and open notebooks. There were no spotlights, no performance, only honesty. I kept some things to myself. I did not share everything. I did not mention my family because it was unnecessary. Instead, I revealed the form of the story, how it folded inward, how a label quickly turns into a trap, and how easily that trap is disguised as help. Somewhere in the middle of this, I looked up and noticed Tyler at the back of the room. He was standing openly, not hiding, and he met my gaze without looking away. After the session ended, he waited for the space to clear and then approached me saying, "I told them I am finished pretending they were good people." I nodded silently because that was his story to own. Then he added, "They did not just make you the problem, they assigned you a diagnosis." I stayed quiet because I did not have to explain. He already understood. That evening, as I passed through the clinic's lobby, I saw my name engraved on the glass donor wall. Just 4 words, Dr. Elise Monroe, Psychiatry. For the first time, I did not feel erased. I felt acknowledged and valued. The invitation arrived in a creamy envelope with heavy paper and a stamped seal. A national symposium focused on adolescent psychiatric ethics, with a panel dedicated to misdiagnosis, power, and the consequences of silence. They asked me to speak. At first I almost refused because I was not a public speaker and did not seek applause. But then I reflected on how many voices never get the chance to be heard, and how many girls are still told they are too emotional, too dramatic, too much. So I agreed. The auditorium was small and personal, filled with faces full of attention. Notebooks were ready. There were no lights or performances, only honesty. I did not share everything. I did not name my family because it was not needed. Instead, I told the shape of the story unfolded in a way that it seemed to collapse inward, illustrating how a label can become a trap, and how easily that trap is disguised as aid. Somewhere midway through, I glanced up and noticed Tyler Monroe standing at the back of the room. He was not hiding. Instead, he met my gaze and did not look away. After the session ended, he waited until the room emptied before approaching me and saying, "I spoke with them. I told them I am finished pretending they were decent people." I simply nodded since that was his story to share now. Then he added, "They not only made you the problem, they created your diagnosis." I remained silent because there was no need to explain further. He already comprehended. That evening, I passed the clinic lobby where my name was engraved on the glass donor wall. Just 4 words, Dr. Elise Monroe, Psychiatry. For the first time, I did not feel erased, but rather recognized and grounded. I had no intention of returning to the house since it had been sold. A new family lived there, painting the shutters, trimming the lawn, and hanging a wind chime by the porch. Yet, I drove past anyway, parked across the street, and sat with the engine off, holding the letter on my lap. Mrs. Rivera's handwriting remained clear despite the faded edges. You were not sick. They were afraid of you. One day, you will return. I had not come back carrying fury or anger, but with records, with evidence, with a name they would no longer be able to erase. This time, I stepped out of the car and walked up to the porch. A child's drawing was taped to the front window. The new owner opened the door, curious but kind. I introduced myself and said, "I once lived here." She nodded quietly and replied. Quietly, I said, "You are not the first person to return." I did not stay long. I had no intention to. I simply went inside, placed the letter into the mailbox and whispered, "This belongs here far more than I do." Then I slipped back into the car and sat surrounded by silence. Not the kind that once frightened me, but a silence that felt deserved. They had branded me unstable, confined me, rewriting my story without ever asking if I even possessed one. Yet I did. I had lived it aloud, in packed lecture halls, within case files, etched on glass panels, and through hushed conversations. I was no longer their source of shame. I had become my own history, and if the past ever came knocking again, I was prepared not with fury but with truth, and I understood exactly how to organize it.